Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Fireplace Conversations with the NICG. I'm the Executive Director of the NICG, and I'm with beautiful ladies tonight. It's an all-ladies panel tonight. And I have with me Libertha Kapere, I have Hinasha Mbudje, and I have Erenstine Tuneeko, and I'm going to introduce all of the three of them and dive right into our topic. So Libertha Kapere is an admitted legal practitioner, like all three are actually, and holds a B.Juris as well as an LLB degree from the University of Namibia, and has also completed the Executive Development Program through the University of Stellenbosch. During her 18 years career, a long time, she has had wide exposure to an extensive range of legal matters. In her current role, she provides the highest possible level of governance and legal services to fellow executives and the board. She's also the deputy chairperson of the NICG board. So in that current role that she's talking about, she's the company secretary for the group of NAMDEB, basically. Erenstine, on my left, is an admitted legal practitioner as well and has worked for several public entities as governance and legal advisor to the board and management. Her work experience includes public law, civil litigation, and legal compliance. Ms. Tuneeko has a B.Juris as well and an LLB from the University of Namibia as well. Her experience in corporate governance spans over a period of 14 years and includes board membership to the Namibia Press Agency, where she's the deputy chairperson. She's also a non-executive director at the NICG board. And then I have Hinasha Mbudje with me. She's a corporate legal advisor at NamWater, and she's an admitted legal practitioner and a chartered international company secretary. She holds a Bachelor of Law, LLB, Onus from the University of Pretoria, a postgraduate diploma in risk and compliance management from University of Johannesburg, and a professional degree in company secretarial and governance practice, and honors at that from Chartered Institute of Southern Africa. She has 13 experience in the legal and governance sector. And so tonight we have an all-ladies panel, but that doesn't say that the topic that we are dealing with today is only in the space of ladies or that only ladies are in that space. In fact, there are a lot of gentlemen in that space as well, but only tonight we happen to have ladies. But you know, just for your knowledge, men are also in the space of company secretaries. And we're speaking to company secretaries. You might wonder why the topic says more than a mere note taker. We're going to tackle the issue of who a company secretary is in the space of corporate governance. And you know, just to introduce my topic, the role of company secretary has been misapprehended in the past and also currently as that of an executive administrative assistant. Now the role has opportunely transitioned from that of a note taker at the board meetings or administrative servant of the board to a much broader role as a board advisor and overall corporate governance professional. And that's what we're really here to talk about today. And I actually want to start with Libertha because you look so relaxed. So, like I said, a company secretary is no longer just a support person, but holds a key senior position within organizations. In the light of that recent regulatory developments and high risk of personal liability for governance transgressions and so on, the role of company secretary as governance watchdog has promptly gained foreground. Can you talk about the various responsibilities where the company secretary can assist and add value, not just as a note taker, but now as a governance practitioner?
Thank you, Vincia, and thank you for the invitation to talk about this very important topic.
Yeah.
And I think the days of a co-sec or company secretary being a note taker are long gone. This is a strategic role, and it is one that is advisory. It is an enabling role and a supporting role. Yeah. And obviously, you know, a lot of times we talk about the fiduciary duties that directors have, but we forget that the company secretary has the same fiduciary duties as an officer of the company. And these duties are also highlighted in the Companies Act. And just to speak about the enabling role of the company secretary, a lot of work happens before the board meeting. It is in the board meeting that we do take our minutes and our notes, but before the board meeting, quite a bit happens. Yeah. The company secretary needs to make sure that the board gets the right information to take decisions. And a lot of times when I speak to younger company secretaries in my role as a coach, I ask them whether they read the board packs or the documents they get from executives, and some of them actually don't read it. And it's important for a company secretary to go through the whole board pack to make sure that executives report the right information to the board. Sometimes, as it happens, executives get busy and repeat a lot of information, copy and paste. And as a COSEC, you need to make sure that information that was reported at the last board meeting is not repeated. So quite a bit of work happens before the board meeting. And again, a lot of work happens after the board meeting, where as the company secretary, you need to make sure the decisions of the board are implemented. You need to make sure all the executives are aware of the actions and that they actually do what the board has said they need to do. And for me, Vincia, a lot of the governance failures at times I want to attribute to us as company secretaries, because we are the custodians of governance. Governance basically revolves around us. It is said we are the gatekeeper. So if we are the gatekeeper and there is a failure, where do you attribute the fault to? Where do you start in asking what went wrong? I think you start at the company secretary. So I'm not going to be I'm not going to be theoretical. I think it's important to share the practical things that company secretaries do. A lot of times there's storms in the boardroom. Directors do argue with each other. Executives and board argues. And I think as a company secretary, you play a mediating role because you're the trusted advisor, not only of the board, but also of the executives. So in that role, you play a mediating role, making sure that whatever storms there are, because you are the custodian of all information, the historical knowledge keeper, you need to make sure that those storms are adequately addressed and that relationships are maintained between board and executives.
So that's a good point that actually leads to my next question. Thank you for mentioning that. I mean, you've mentioned that, you know, you're not just taking notes anymore. It's not just administrative anymore. It's also not, it goes beyond preparing for meetings and making sure that they run smoothly. It goes to ensuring board development, board training, and all the things that you've mentioned, as well as advising the board, especially in this relationship. And not just in the relationship, but also, you know, other aspects of governance. But now in that relationship, a company secretary must be independent, Erenstine, and she must ensure never to get engrossed in board discussions, first of all. And obviously, also, you know, be that mediator that was just mentioned. So, her role is to be is really limited to giving advice on procedural and, you know, legal matters. Can you describe that arm's length relationship that a company secretary should maintain in reporting functionally to the board via the chairperson and administratively to the CEO, and also, you know, playing that mediation role?
All right, thank you for the invitation. Yes, there is a need for the COSEC to actually maintain that arm's length relationship, especially with the chairperson. And really, that means that you talked about independence. She must maintain a professional relationship to an extent that she's able to advise the chairperson and not get too personal, so that when something goes wrong, she's able to independently and professionally advise the chair to say, Chair, here you've erred because of A, B, C, and D. So that's really what it means. When it comes to really reporting to the CEO or the MD, there's a need to maintain a relationship between the MD and the chairperson. Actually advise the MD also on governance, because he's also a board member who also has the same rights and fiduciary duties as any other director. So it's important that then she also, I think Libertha talked about the mediation. It's also very, very important, because some chairs would actually want to speak to the COSEC, and so you become the go-between, the MD and the chairperson, and you need to be cordial about that. You need to be professional about how you address issues, and actually remember that you have two bosses, and each has different needs. So you need to maintain that.
Yeah, and I think maintaining that independence and objectivity can be a difficult role, especially when you are in an executive role. Remember, I've mentioned there's the dotted line to the CEO, and then there's that direct link to the board, because the board appoints the company secretary. How do I maintain that relationship, especially when, some companies, obviously, company secretaries are not in the executive role because they are not recognized in this important space that we are talking about today. But where they are recognized as important governance practitioners, obviously they also serve in that executive space. So, which means they have a link with EXCO, and then there's the board. Can you talk about a practical way or just practical means of keeping that independence? In fact, any of you can take this one. I'm actually just building onto that, what you've answered now, and just putting more practical terms to that. Libertha, you want to take that?
The role of a company secretary sometimes is quite a lonely one, exactly because of that independence. Yeah. You're not per se a part of the executive, you're not per se a part of the board. So the independence cannot be overemphasized. Yeah. And at times I actually feel like I'm a bit schizophrenic, because I need to be, when you were the executive, right, as a team player of the executive, you sometimes get misunderstood when you want to maintain independence, as if you're not a team player. And sometimes it's also misunderstood when that trusted relationship between the board chair and the company secretary exists. As a secret keeper of the board, you sometimes are privy to information that the executives know you are privy to, but unfortunately you cannot share it. And that basically is the arm's length relationship. Yes, you're part of the executive, but you are maintaining that independence to make sure you remain the trusted secret keeper. And as secretary, the word secret is linked to that. So your independence cannot be underestimated.
Yes. So Hinasha, latching on to that question and, going right into that liaison role that the company secretary has to play, how important is that role then if you're speaking about that, arm's length relationship? Do you find that, you are just, she says it's a lonely role. It is, in fact. We've all played that role before. And also it depends on what you deem yourself as for that role to be. Either you are overly involved in things, or you should, keep that arm's length. That liaison role between board and management, can you speak about that a little bit? And then I'll come back to the other question.
Evening, Vincia, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah. Just to build on to what Libertha was saying, it really can become a lonely space in which you're operating in. And it is really true that you are the secret keeper, or the person that really can't divulge that information. So it's important also, it's a mechanism that's there so as also to protect yourself, because later on, as you're giving guidance to the board, you have to be as impartial, you have to be as independent, as objective as possible. So for me, I also think that I can't find myself having breakfast dates with my board chair every Friday, and then should the turbulence that Libertha was referring to occur, and then it's expected of me to be objective, Body language within the meeting would also dictate that, are you really going to do this to me right now? Or it's, at the end of the day, the lines will get blurred at some point. So the arm's length relationship is important, and it should really be kept.
Yeah. There's another scenario that I thought about where company secretary is underestimated that role in certain entities. And it could be that it's the company secretary herself that has a timid nature, and it could also be that the recognition from the board as well as executive is that a company secretary is just a subservient role. when you find yourself in that position, I actually want to ask this of all three of you. When you find yourself in a position as a company secretary where your role as a governance practitioner is not recognized and deemed or esteemed as a really high and important role, what must you do? I think a lot of company secretaries find themselves in that position.
Maybe if I can go first.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of the directors firstly understanding what is your role and what is also their role. Because when they understand your role and their role, then they know what kind of assistance you can be to them, what kind of advice you can give them. But obviously this also comes with the way you present yourself in terms of information that you give, the trust that you're building with your directors, how available you are in terms of really serving them, the executives as well, the quality of your work. So that also gives, it adds to really creating value and actually then making everybody understand what is your role. I think maybe Libertha can just take up from the...
Maybe Hinasha and then Libertha.
Well, to build on to that, I do agree that the onus is on myself to make sure that my role is understood. So it should be, we should move away from thinking that we are simply there just to take notes. We should also be there, we should also make it clear to directors that we are guiding them in their decision making. And as well, directors should also be made aware of the fact that they are also reporting to a shareholder. So the nature of the decisions that they're going to be making should be guided by the advice that we give. And it should be understood by a director, as Libertha said about the fiduciary duty, that the advice that's given by a company secretary is impartial and it is objective, you see. So for me then, the aspect of ethics also comes into play, and the aspect of conflict of interest also comes into play, because although it's brushed off and it could be taken lightly, and it's something that directors might not place too much emphasis on. I feel as a company secretary, you should always ring the meeting in and just remind them that we still have this duty towards the entity, we still have this duty towards the shareholder, and ethically we should be conducting our deliberations in an ethical manner. And should I ever find myself conflicted at any point as a director, I would know how to raise that. Yeah.
Libertha,
so,
thank you, Hinasha. Libertha, I want to have you speak more into emphasizing that importance of being in that boardroom. You're in the boardroom and you're just not supposed to be just note taker, like Hinasha said. How can you emphasize the importance of your role?
Look, Vincia, I think as a company secretary, you are bound to be put in a box one or other time.
Yeah.
And this role is about building relationships. It's a position of trust. And how do you build trust? It's through people learning, through your behavior, through the things that you say, through the things that you do, that they can actually trust you. And that's how you'll get out of that box. And I think it's also at all times acting in the best interest of the company. When people, your board and your executives realize that when Libertha says something, when she does something, it is actually not in her own best interest or in the interest of the board or the executives, it's in the interest of the company. That's how you tend to get out of that role of being a note taker. And the other thing is when you're in the boardroom, I think sometimes it's about personality.
Yeah.
As company secretaries, we are not directors. We are not the decision makers. We are the supporting, we play a supporting role in the boardroom. I think directors, I want to mention the 4 line of sight, the roles of the board, the foresight, the oversight, the hindsight, and the insight. And that is where we come in as company secretaries. When they need to remember something, we are there to remind them of previous board decisions. When they need to have their oversight role, we need to make sure the right information is in the board. And let's not take over in the boardroom. That's where trust is broken. That's where executives tend to think, she's reporting us, she speaks too much. And that's where directors sometimes feel you want to take over. So I think it's important to don't remain in the box. Own your space as a company secretary, male or female. You have an important role to play. And both directors and executives need to understand the statutory duties that a company secretary plays. Those are non-negotiables. And I think with board inductions, that would become quite clear. If you have a board that does not understand the role of a company secretary, I'll again blame it on the company secretary themselves.
For not inducting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Before you proceed, I just want to say, from my experience, I think in terms of how that role plays out, it also depends on the maturity of the board. Because you get different types of boards in terms of experience. Yeah. So there are the ones you get the ones that are a bit more who obviously know more, and those ones tend to understand your role better. And when they do, and when you have a very experienced chairperson, somehow your role becomes a bit less. From my experience, you get to do less than when you have to more like guide a less experienced board. Then you get to do a bit more, because then you play almost like a proper assistant to the chair, you know, where you also guide the chair. So that's also the difference in terms of the role.
So the experience of yourself, the experience of the board as well, definitely plays a role. Hinasha, you mentioned the communication aspect, where you said that, you know, you definitely also reporting to, you know, boards must know they report to stakeholders in essence. So stakeholders are investors, it can be anyone else, and it includes the shareholder. What would be the role of the company secretary in maintaining the relationship, you know, effective shareholder relation or stakeholder relationships, and ensuring communication and that it's done correctly? Maybe I'm thinking about AGMs on a very practical note, but also there are other forms of communication, if you can think of.
For me, what comes to mind is sort of the company secretary having an execution plan, you see, and that for me would work in line with the company's actual strategy. So when you communicate with your stakeholders, with your shareholders, your plan, your divisional plan, or should tie into that. So for instance, I should be able to, in terms of the communication policies that exist within the organization, identify how I would inform my shareholder of an AGM, how I would notify my internal or external stakeholders of a resolution or an action item. So I think what my learning has been post-COVID from that is that previously, I think I should be honest, I was quite naive in thinking that the business and the shareholder or the stakeholder were mutually exclusive. And I've come to learn that post-COVID, there is really an interdependence, and there's a heavy reliance on both parties to manage that communication.
Anyone want to add to that? I'm thinking of, you know, you've mentioned board resolutions, for instance, and as you also mentioned, you know, some policies for communication that might be in place. Because it's not just the shareholder that's a stakeholder, there are other entities that are involved. Would you like to speak to that, Libertha?
I think, Vincia, I would like to speak a little bit about transparency as well. And I think when we talk stakeholders, we talk transparency. And we've actually limited shareholders to AGMs, which is, I think, the wrong thing. A shareholder is not only supposed to be engaged when it comes to an AGM. For instance, when a budget is done and dividends are part of that budget, it's important for shareholders to understand what they can expect in terms of dividends. And sometimes as companies, we fail to keep the shareholder informed. After every board meeting, I think it's important, particularly when you have different shareholders. There are sometimes just one shareholder, sometimes different shareholders with conflicting interests. It's important as a company to communicate board decisions to the shareholder that might impact them. Because we get our license to operate from the stakeholders, and the shareholder being one of them, a very important one. And sometimes we have minority shareholders that we sometimes tend to underestimate or just ignore, but they are just as important as the majority shareholder and constantly needs to be appraised of what is happening in the business and what they can expect in terms of performance. So we shouldn't limit shareholder engagement to the AGM only.
I think so too. I mean, and that goes to also to just, communicating with the board itself. When you have, and there's just this common rule that when you have more engagement with the board, even as executive through the company secretary, in terms of information sharing, you won't have the board ask you too many questions or go into operations at board meetings. So that sharing of information, I think, is very key, not only with shareholders, not only with your employees and other, because, company secretary also gets to, the other stakeholders, the employees or the exco and so forth. So there's a myriad arms of communication, and it has to be kept open all the time. So when you were saying something about information sharing from management to the board, it goes the other way around as well, and I think those same principles can apply there. There's also the drafting aspect, and we'll come to minutes in a while, but there's also, drafting the governance section when we're reporting annually, so in our annual reports, and ensuring that all the reports are made available to the shareholder according to relevant regulatory and less holding requirements. You don't have to know the less holding, listing requirements, etc., but just generally, how important is this role? What does it entail when we are doing annual reports and it's now integrated reporting?
I think maybe just to also start with the aspect of transparency and reporting, and also to link it back to our topic. It's also one of the more new, not maybe new roles of a COSEC, to really advance the issue, the new concept of integrated thinking in terms of how we reporting to our stakeholders. And obviously this is contained in a report that we then share with our stakeholders, no longer just shareholders. So as a COSEC, you would want to inform the prospective investors, your shareholders, your stakeholders, on how the company is run in terms of governance. So you want to talk about what are the rules of governance that you comply to, whether it's King 3, name code, or King 4, so that also people who understand these things, they know if you follow these guidelines, then you are bound to actually run the company properly. And then they also create some kind of a confidence in the board. So it's important to make reference to these codes, the laws that you comply to, if you're a public enterprise, or if you're a company registered in terms of the Companies Act, you need to make reference to these laws as to assure the public stakeholders that you are compliant with the laws. You need to share who your directors are. For somebody who just picks up an annual report of the NICG and wants to know who's actually leading this institution, what role do they play, what committees are there in terms of compliance to name code, that you have an audit committee, you have a REMCO, you have a nomination committee, and also in terms of attendance, how frequent, how diligent the directors are in attending, and also issues of transparency also talks about how much you pay your directors. So your shareholders can also know that you're sticking to the resolutions of the AGM, where they approve these fees. So that's really what I can think of in terms of what should be in the governance report. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone want to add to that?
Maybe to add, apart from the governance part of it, there's an important aspect in the report that speaks to what you do in society. And I think that is quite an important one.
Yeah.
So nowadays, that when we talk about ESGs, and that is an important aspect that really needs to form part of that report. And the role of the company secretary, I think, should not just be limited to the governance part, but you need to make sure as COSEC that every aspect of integration is covered in the report. The ESGs, environmental, social, governance part, everything should be catered for. And if you as COSEC focuses on the governance part, I think we might lose some aspects of the reporting duties.
And maybe, Libertha, when you say governance, when you focus on governance, I'm thinking that if you deem ESG as part of governance, and if you deem sustainability reporting is quite key. So if you deem those aspects as integral to governance, then it speaks to the term integrated, which means that we are integrating every aspect into our reporting. So governance, meaning that all those things, and obviously she has mentioned the committees, and those committees speak to those aspects of governance that should be covered in the reporting. The other aspect that I know that company secretaries, and maybe you guys can speak to it, is that you are not just you literally not just drafting, but you're also in the liaison. Again, the liaison aspect comes in where you're speaking to the finance person to give you certain information for the reporting. The chairperson needs to, can you speak to the practical aspects? How does it go practically when we're doing reporting? Because a lot of company secretaries perhaps have not done this, and they are also excluded from that process, and it's important that they are part of it and they understand what their role should be.
I think, Vincia, the company secretary, just adding to the role of the COSEC, it's the thread that binds the organization together.
Yeah.
And I think, again, also it's the glue that keeps the organization together. And as a COSEC, you need line of sight in every single discipline within the organization. And because of the role you play, you would know in terms of what needs to be in that report, the financial aspects, the sustainability aspects, what we do in society, the HR aspects, speaking to people issues. So I think, as I said, a COSEC role is about relations. You need to have relationships with every single executive in the business, because ultimately their areas would involve decision making in the board. And whatever decisions are made in the board are important areas to report on to society and to stakeholders. So I think it's the thread that keeps everything together, and being that thread, you need to play an integral part in drafting the integrated report. Sometimes company secretaries get involved as editors, but that's not the role of the COSEC. You're not the editor of the annual report. You are one of the drafters of the annual report.
And I wanted you to bring out that aspect because it's important, emerging, aspiring company secretaries, and also those that have just entered the market, and also in places where companies don't take this role seriously. That's exactly what they do. Have a look at this document, edit it for language, but you're there for more than that, for more comprehensive, more in-depth information that should be shared. Then, our topic is more than a mere minute or note taker. That is very important to me. Why? Because of that traditional perspective that a company secretary should get into a boardroom, should have a pen and a paper and resolved to just being that person. Well, yes, Hinasha?
If I may, just to add on to what Erenstine and Libertha said about the integrated report.
Yeah.
It's also important to as a company secretary, it's also important to demonstrate that what is being reported by the respective divisions, the thread of governance comes throughout.
That's it.
So as a reader of the report, I should be able to say that, okay, there are policies, regulations in place that actually govern the different operations. So there's something for HR that she was referring to. There's that for operations. There's that for research and development, for innovation. There's that which is managed now overall in the governance report, with which we are all responsible for reporting on. And then that which is in the text, are we able to reconcile it to the numbers? So is it true what we are reporting financially? Is it accurately contained in the written report? Yeah.
I think that's also a very important aspect, actually, making sure that not only you are drafting it, but there is accuracy and that there's integrity in our reporting. I think that's a key aspect. And now just tying back to what I wanted to say about note-taking, a very important aspect is that while note-taking is not your only responsibility, it is also your responsibility still. Can we talk about minutes now? We're talking about minutes. What are the cardinal aspects of minute taking? Please help.
If I can maybe just start.
Yes.
I think it's important that, firstly, as a COSEC, you need to understand the business, so that when there's a discussion around an issue, you actually know how to pick out the relevant issues. So you need to be concise in terms of what you're reporting, what you're writing in the minutes. You need to reflect the general discussion so that it actually ties to a resolution. Because for somebody who reads the minutes, they need to actually understand that there was a thought process by the directors in arriving to a decision. And actually, in terms of style, it really differs. There are some, you will come in a company and then a board is a different way to do it, and then you just actually just then fall into that. You can actually advise in terms of good practice, but it's not a matter of saying Libertha said this and who said that, because the board acts as a collective. So whatever is said is a board discussion and a board decision. Obviously, you get those cases where a director has a dissenting opinion, and then he actually then insists that his opinion or his position is then reflected in the minutes because of maybe possible liability to him and so on. And then you do that. But it's important that it's concise, the language is proper, and it's easy to read. Obviously, we talked about whether it's in the past tense or those are all maybe just nitty-gritties on how to do it. But it's about decisions, and Libertha really touched about that, because at the end of the day, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we want to go back to the minutes and actually get a resolution that is clear and was actually implemented, hopefully. But it's important that there's certainty and clarity in terms of how minutes are recorded. Yeah.
And I think there's no one-size-fits-all, Vincia. It's with minutes. I think the important thing for me to mention is we must forget about minutes being a transcript. It's not a transcript. It's about reporting what was done in the meeting, how it was done, and the rationale for whatever decision was taken. So basically, for me, in short, I would say a minute is the summary of what happened in the meeting. I know there are some directors who would love to see their names in minutes. I think in the company where I am, I've been allowed the flexibility to remove names from minutes. You basically state that it was noted, it was decided, the directors discussed. So you use language that is neutral instead of mentioning specific directors' names. So there's no one size fits all.
Yeah. Hinasha, would you like to have a go at it before I ask a specific question about what she said?
No, I think they've captured it
Maybe
quite
you can
well.
come in when I ask this question. You know, there are actually different aspects to minute taking. You've mentioned the one aspect. There's the other aspect that it's a fiduciary and liability purpose that it serves. In this purpose, directors are held liable for, you know, the processes and also, you know, the very things that they discussed and so on. And this takes me to your perspective about a neutral way of minute taking, which is good. but you know that minutes serve and can serve as an evidence. And you know the role of, and when I was introducing you, you are all legal practitioners. And for the person out there, company secretary is not a secretary like a PA. It's actually a legal person who's able to give legal advice to a board of directors and to stakeholders. In that role of minute taking, you need to anticipate certain things, and that's the fiduciary duties and the liabilities that could be forthcoming. In your minute taking, how do you ensure that this happens? That's the one aspect. The other aspect is that minutes are also a benchmark. This is in my experience as a company secretary. It's also a benchmark for assessment. So when directors say that they are active in meetings, but you have not recorded and you've only been neutral and you don't say Vincia has contributed, so how do we assess contributions and so on? So please speak to me about that neutrality and how that speaks to minutes being an evidence as well as the assessment tool.
Vincia, I think, yes, correctly so, that directors will be held personally liable for decisions that they take, particularly when there's negligence and fraud involved. And for me, it revolves around how the minutes are written. When there's consensus in the board, you would really just focus on what was discussed and the decision reached. It's when there's dissent, as Erenstine has mentioned, that you'd particularly mention the name of the director because they did not agree with a particular decision. And in that way, you basically help to make sure that when there's a liability issue where a director had a dissenting voice, it is reflected. But when there's consensus, the whole board has agreed to it, and each and every director will be held liable individually, but also as a collective because it's a unanimous decision. But the thing is, when you start mentioning names in minutes, every single director would want to see their name, and it becomes a transcript then, because you'd mention Erenstine's name, you'd mention Vincia's name, and then Hinasha doesn't see her name and would ask, but I also said this. So I think in terms of effectiveness of the board, there's a lot of focus required in the board meeting from the company secretary and from the board chair. The board chair should be so focused that he or she observes that Vincia has been too quiet in this meeting today, and get some response from you so that all the directors play a role in the meeting. It shouldn't be about seeing your name in the minutes. It should be about contributing effectively.
That's it. And I think if you are waiting to see your name without having contributed, I think that's, it's like you said, that shouldn't happen. But it does happen, unfortunately. And for the sake of assessment, perhaps there's also a different way of minute taking. And I want to go to that, Hinasha. How detailed should minutes be? What should be included? What should not be included?
Okay, the basics. I think for me, my boss likes to say that, Hinasha, your minutes should outlive you. Think of yourself as a judge. When you go one day and somebody gets into your office, they should be able to find their way throughout that situation. So for me, minutes should have the attendees, the date, the time. COVID now, the mode in which the meeting was conducted, it should state the declaration of interest. That should definitely be in there. As was stated earlier, they should be as objective also as possible. So it should just, for me, reflect the matter that's on the table, the comments, the input received from the directors, whatever their viewpoints may be, those should be captured quite well. The recommendations, and then the resolutions. You see, I sometimes find myself getting lost in the discussion, and then I have to ask, sorry, what was that? Can I just have it because I need it for purposes of my minutes? As a company secretary, you can easily fall into that, and then that is actually not what was discussed by the meeting.
So accurate minutes, right?
Yes,
very
it's
accurate.
very important.
I think details differ, like you have just mentioned, depending on who takes the minutes. You find that it's a 5-page minute for 3 hours meeting, and you find that it's 30 pages or it's 20, 15 pages. It just depends on who's taking the minutes, isn't it? You spoke about resolutions. How should that be minuted?
I don't really understand the question very well.
So resolutions, I always say to people that I mentor that when you resolve something, it should be a standalone. It should be able to stand on its own. When I read minutes, I should be able to have a recollection of what happened in that boardroom without having to go back to another, text or another reference point or something. Yeah. So how should resolutions be recorded?
Now I understand.
Yes, sorry,
I think
it was vague. Yes.
No problem.
Yes.
I think it should actually contain more or less like a summary of the discussion or the issues that somehow the board took into account in arriving to the resolution, to the decision. As you say, so that it can actually stand alone when you do an extract, you have an idea of what was discussed or what actually prompted the decision. Yeah.
And what I tend to do, Vincia, is I highlight the resolution. So when you go through the minute book or through the minutes, you'd see that the resolution stands alone. Yeah. It's either italics or it's bolded, and it's based on the discussion the directors resolved as follows, then the resolution is highlighted or in italics. So your eye would immediately catch what was the decision of the board.
And also something I learned in my experience is that resolutions should be numbered. It's actually very nice to number them, because when you number them, it's easy to reference them as well. So like you say, bold, italic, whatever, but also maybe number them just so that they are clear and important, that we can read them on their own without having to ask what happened here, what is it that we're talking about, and so on. So definitely you've mentioned the attendees, you've mentioned all the things that should be in the minutes. There is a question from our audience, which I would like to actually raise. Do company secretaries have the right to report any unethical conduct they come across, since they are aware of confidential and sensitive information, for instance, through whistleblowing mechanism, and what is their role in that? That's a tough question, but also very important. You want to go at it first?
I would say yes, Vincia. I mean, as the company secretary and as the custodian of governance, ethics is one of the pillars of governance. And when there is an ethical transgression that you are aware of, I think my duty as company secretary is to go to the person that has transgressed and tell them that I've noted this transgression and I have a duty to report it. If it's an executive, one needs to inform them that I have a duty to report it, either whether it's to the board chair or elsewhere. And sometimes, I must say, sometimes people have blind spots when it comes to ethics. They might not be aware that they've committed an ethical transgression. And as a company secretary, I think it's important to constantly make sure that both directors and executives are aware of the code of conduct, of their ethical duties, so that